kind of actually similar to that worst decision, I give this advice a lot. Actually, it's one of the questions I ask when clients come and talk to me, but is what are your goals? And whether that's the first 90 days or the first 2 to 3 years, I think that drives a lot of how you're going to do it. So in my instance, I knew I wanted to start a business, but I didn't really set that as a goal. And then some people really just want the flexibility to own their job. And so I was owning my job, but I wasn't starting a business, and there was conflict there. And some people it's just different. So if you know that you want to run a giant 7-figure business and you have that at the forefront, you're going to create processes and systems to get there. And if you know that you just want the flexibility to be a solopreneur, then you can set up different systems and processes to do that as well.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we got another great guest on the podcast, Natalie Cook. And Natalie graduated in undergraduate in humanities in about 2008. Indicated there was a bit of a difficult time securing a job after graduation. Went to teach English in South Korea for a period of time. Came back, met and married her husband. Moved to Seattle. Still a tough job market. So then became a receptionist at a real estate company. Worked at the Gates Foundation for about 4 or 5 years. Got an MBA while doing that. Had a child. Left that, and then found another job, and then started doing some freelancing work. Worked for Starbucks for finances for about a year, and then about 2020 decided to quit while she was pregnant. In her own words, no backup plan. Started networking and built her own business in finance, and took about 4 months off, I think, with the baby. Then came back to the business and is now doing fractional CFO services while building a small team. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Devin.
Absolutely. Excited to have you on. So with that, I just took a much longer journey and condensed it into the 30 or 45-second version of it. So maybe to kick things off, let's unpack that a bit. So tell us a little bit about coming out of undergraduate and about around 2008 and having a difficult time in the job market. Which, by the way, you're probably not the only one at that period of time.
Yes. Yeah. It was a struggle for everyone, I think, except for a few of my friends that graduated with engineering degrees. But, when I started college, everyone told me, just go get a degree. It doesn't matter what you get it in. And within the 4 years that I went to college, that had shifted. And that was no longer the case. I didn't really have a great career plan in place. I really wanted to go into Christian ministry, actually. When I was in undergrad, thought I wanted to just travel overseas and be a missionary like my grandparents. But that changed quite a bit while I was in college and realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I graduated with no understanding of what I had interest in. I knew I liked to travel. And so when I couldn't get a job, I decided to kind of seek out this English teaching business that I had a cousin was teaching English in China, and another study abroad friend from Australia that was teaching in Korea. So I knew a little bit about it, just kind of got the job off of, I don't remember where, some website, got my visa and left in September of 2008. And it was a wonderful experience. I did not enjoy teaching young children, but I loved living in South Korea. And it was such a fun year. It felt like an extended year of having fun in college, with no stress of what was I going to do at the end of it. But then I came back and I met my husband, and we decided to get married. And he did not have a bachelor's degree at the time, so we couldn't go back to Korea, which was my plan. It was a requirement to go teach English there, and I don't think he would have really liked it. and he's from the Bay Area, and we were deciding between Seattle and Bay Area, and we kind of just at some point flipped a coin and we're like, we'll just try Seattle, which I don't, looking back, I'm like, why didn't we think about maybe a third option or
Now, let me just dive into this one question to rewind the story just a
yeah,
little bit. So, graduated, hard time finding a job, which I said,
yeah,
I came out of engineering, and it was maybe better than for engineers, but I think it was a hard time for everybody
yeah,
to find a job. And so you're saying, okay, fun, or one, it sounds like a fun adventure. Go somewhere else a different place in the world. Maybe if you don't love teaching, but you get the opportunity to
yeah,
see a different part, get a different culture. Now, as you're doing that, you were in South Korea for about a year. Is that right?
yep,
So
yeah,
then what made you decide to come back from South? Because this was still what, 2009,
yeah.
2010 timeframe. It's not like the job market was
It was
wonderful
not
and
better.
everything had recovered. So what made you decide to come back as opposed to stay in South Korea?
I was actually just was traveling for a little bit. So I spent some time in Vietnam, and then I spent some time in India. Um, Came back for Christmas, essentially, was like, well, I'll come back, because you don't really get vacation when you're teaching in the world that existed in 2008, might have shifted now in South Korea. You don't get vacation. You get a week off and maybe one day, one holiday. So to take vacation, you had to switch jobs. And so that was my plan. I was going to just come home for a couple of months, hang out, see family and friends, and then go back. And I actually had already started the process of getting back to South Korea, and was maybe even going to leave right before Christmas to start another job. But my friend, one of my good friends who lived in San Jose, California at the time, said, come and visit me. And I was like, yeah, I haven't seen you in a year. She had gotten engaged while I was gone. So I went to visit her, and I met my husband. And that kind of shifted my plans pretty drastically. So I had every intention to go back to South Korea and teach, because I didn't know what I was going to do, and there were no jobs.
No, it makes sense. So,
Yeah.
and then you're saying, okay, South Korea, there's nothing, it's a fun opportunity, good culture, but nothing tying you there. Say,
Yeah.
hey, I met what will be your future spouse, and wanted to stick around, see where that went out. So now you decide to, stay in the States, see where the relationship goes, and explore different things. And I think as you were staying in the States, got married, or met your
Yeah.
husband, got married, which is awesome, and congratulations. And then you stayed in Seattle, and you still had, I think you mentioned that there was still a tough job market. So kind of what
Yeah.
did you do as you ended up staying in the States?
Yeah. So while we were navigating this like new relationship where we had already decided to get married after 10 days of meeting each other, we waited 6 months. An appropriate amount of time. And we both were actually unemployed, because my husband had a tough time also finding a job, and he had kind of just been going from startup to startup. So we ended up in Seattle. We moved to Seattle in July of 2010. So right when we got married. And I had been trying to look for jobs in Seattle, but I wasn't in the city. I was a little bit outside where I grew up. I was helping my grandma a lot. She had gone through knee replacement surgery, so I had taken some time off to help with her. And then I had done some other like house sitting for family friends, just because I was kind of in this weird, like, I'm planning a wedding and I don't know what I'm actually doing with my life kind of business.
Mm.
So it was about 2 months from the time that we got married and moved into the city of Seattle. My husband got a job the week before our wedding, and then I just kind of started searching, but I didn't have any skills. I didn't know what I was supposed to search for. And that was the hardest thing. And I mean, I think at the time, the best way to find a job was still Craigslist. So like, I had a friend that had also just moved, the same friend that introduced us. We were both searching for jobs at the same time. So we would like hang out at coffee shops and just like search Craigslist ads to try to find a job. And I didn't realize until much later that at the time, Seattle was one of the worst job markets. Like, had I known, I maybe not have not have moved there, but it was impossible. Like, no, everyone was way overqualified for their jobs. And so I wish I had known that, because it would have helped mentally. But I really, what I was looking for was just something that could accelerate my career, where I could learn a skill. And so I focused on administrative jobs, because I knew that even if it wasn't the right fit, I would learn something about and have a practical skill. And so that's what I focused on. Ended up at a real estate company, very small, as a receptionist, office manager. And it was weird, because it was just kind of my first like real job that felt more real than anything else. And I did really well there, but I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't like passionate about real estate. It wasn't really, it was a weird culture. It was just didn't, I just was, as it's 2 months in, I was already trying to find another job. Took me another 14 months to find a job, moved to a data center consulting firm, which was still, again, not an area that I ever understood, but I kept with that administrative, like, what's the next step that I could go get more skills? And that job was really interesting because I got to travel. They did professional development courses for data center operators. And so I got to produce events while I was there, and that was a new skill for me. And I also got to travel. I got to go to Singapore and Prague while I worked there, and produce these events, which was kind of tied back to my interest in travel. But while I was there, I also had this longing. I still kind of had that humanities background, and like I wanted to work in nonprofit. And the Gates Foundation, I had a friend that worked at the Gates Foundation. And so I kind of at some point became interested in pursuing that as the next step. And that took me, it took me 9 months to get a job there, which was crazy from the time I started like resume building and networking and figuring out where I could go. So ended up there in global development, thinking, okay, great. I finally found like the footing in my career that I want, of this like travel world and this helping people. And it was great. Like I loved it so much, but I was a temp when I started. So in order to stay, I had to get a full-time role there. And the two options when I was at that point of getting a full-time role, one was in US education and one was still in global development. I ended up getting the US education role, which I didn't expect. I was like, well, I still want to go, like, I just want to travel. I just want to be out, go from country to country. But what that did, which I thought was such a cool story when I look back, was I was on a team of MBAs that were doing good in this education space. And that was what sparked my interest in kind of, okay, now I'm ready to go get another degree. And I was looking at Master of Public Administration and Masters of Business Administration at the same time. But back to that kind of pull of like, well, what will keep me safe in my career? Because I had gone through this kind of traumatic event of not being able to find a job. And so when I looked at the public administration and then the MBA, I was like, well, the MBA opens up a lot more doors than I felt like public administration did. And then because I was working with a team of a lot of like several Harvard MBAs that I really enjoyed working with, that to me was like, oh, I could do the MBA and I could still work in nonprofit. So all of these kind of things kind of pieced together. And I ended up applying to an MBA program at University of Washington, an evening MBA, so that I could keep my job because I was not going to give up a job to go back to school. And while I was in the MBA, and we can unpack this even more, I really switched to wanting to work for for-profit companies. I was in the education tech space at the Gates Foundation doing investments in ed tech. And there was a mix of for-profit and nonprofit companies, and they were startups. And I was like, oh, this feels like a much bigger pull to me than where I thought that I wanted to go in my career. And so just like little kind of pieces kind of started to fit together. And when I was in my MBA, I really focused on the hard skills that I didn't have before. Like I didn't have the business language. I didn't have the finance expertise. And so I focused on that. I had the soft skills of like dealing with people, but I didn't have that hard skill. So all of these pieces come together. I had my first child while I was in my MBA, kind of midway through, took maternity leave, came back to my job at Gates, graduated, quit my job at Gates within like 5 weeks, and started freelancing for startups. I basically just begged a founder that I had done a free internship with, and I was like, can you pay me to do anything for your company? Like, I don't care what it is, just pay me. And so that kind of propelled into getting these kind of scrappy roles at startups. And I didn't feel like I had a real job at the time, but I felt like I was getting closer to doing what I wanted to do. And I got to spend a lot of time with my daughter, which was really important. She was also very clingy. And so it worked really well for us to be
Mm.
spending that time together. She basically wouldn't let anyone watch her except my husband and I. So um
Now, one of the things you mentioned, because I get it from the sense of, hey, I figured out what I don't want to do, which is end up being I don't want to do non-for-profits, and I also kind of figured out the direction I want to go. But if I remember when we talked a little bit before, when you quit or you left the job, you didn't really have a backup plan, or you didn't really. I
yeah.
mean, you say you kind of went and asked for, kind of the scrappy jobs, but it was kind of like there was no guarantee. You really didn't have any. Hey, we're a paying client, or here's the plan, or here's how you're going to make money. And so was that nerve wracking? Was that kind of, hey, I've got, my husband's got an income, we can get by
Yeah.
on that? Or kind of how did that transition go as you're saying, okay, I've kind of figured out what I want to do. Now had to figure out how to implement on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had been the main earner of our family up until that point, and my husband had been self-employed and for several years. And I kind of always a little bit envied that. And he knew it. But at that point, he had an opportunity to go take a full-time job at one of the places he was subcontracting for. And basically he just offered to take the job so that I could figure it out. And that was like just a very kind thing for him to do. So it gave us that financial security, whereas prior his income was very lumpy and I was the provider of the steady income. And so he took on the steady job so that I could take on a very not steady job. And because we were very, lived very frugally. We had bought our house already, so our mortgage was low. We had a renter in our mother-in-law unit. So we had other ways of kind of spreading out that income to take this risk. It was still very nerve-wracking because I didn't know what was going to come from it. But and it was also nerve-wracking because I had already tried to apply for for-profit jobs. Like I knew I wanted to switch into for-profit. It's really hard to go from philanthropy to for-profit because the roles don't translate. It took me probably now I could go back and translate what I did because I know that it translates, but at the time I didn't, and I didn't know how to talk about it. My puppy's running around, in case you're hearing that stuff.
No, you're good.
But it was very nerve-wracking, but it also, like, to me, I think the way that I live my life, I feel like if my gut says this is the right decision, even if it's nerve-wracking at the time, it usually is the right decision. And that was the case. Like I felt like this is the right decision. I'm continuing to do this thing. And looking back, it paid off. So it was great.
No, and that's great that it paid off, and it is always a bit nerve wracking, and you're always wondering if it's the right decision. And the only way ever usually find out is if you make that jump and
Right.
try it out, and you see whether or not it's what you want and you have what it takes, or if it's not what you want, or you need to go to different directions. So definitely makes sense. So now as you're doing that, you start out kind of taking what people send your way, kind of being scrappy and doing that, and then you kind of maybe pivoted, transition, moved over to kind of doing fractional CFO and start building a team. So how did that transition go?
Yeah. So in that midst of freelancing, I did actually have by the end of like 6 months, I did have a panic of like, wait, I don't have a real job. And it's looking back, I totally had a real job. Like I would have given myself all the confidence if I could have given my past advice, come back into the future. But I had all these MBA classmates that were getting jobs at corporate companies that seemed really cushy. And I felt like, oh, I need a real job. And so I actually stopped consulting and doing this freelance work and went into work in finance at Starbucks because I just felt like I needed some other thing to kind of figure it out. But what was really interesting is that while I was freelancing, all of the people that I freelanced for needed help with finance. They were all very young startups, and that was the gap that they had. Like that was the thing that I kept coming back to. And because I had focused on finance in my MBA, specifically entrepreneurial finance, it was a great match. And because I had been in finance adjacent roles at Gates Foundation, it built this thread. So I went to Starbucks in supply chain finance, which was such a cool opportunity because I got to really see like I was into this tech focus and I was like, do I like tech or did I just fall into it? It's always fun to know, do you really enjoy something or did it just happen to you? So I got to learn so much. I worked on the warehouse and transportation side. The P&L I oversaw was $1 billion, which was pretty cool to see all that together. I got to learn corporate finance. Corporate was not for me. I loved my team and I loved what I did. And I think that I had this really cool opportunity to have the job that I felt like was the most exciting corporate job that I could have come up with at the time for what I wanted. And I just was like, oh, I love working for myself. Like that was the thing that I kept coming back to was like, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I was afraid to go sell this work because I didn't have confidence in it. So, let's see, March 2020, I had been at Starbucks 7 or 8 months, maybe, I think. The world shuts down because of COVID. My husband quit his job because I had stable income. So he was like, I'm back to self-employment because he's just as entrepreneurial as I am. And I'm like, well, I gotta keep my job at Starbucks for a little while because he basically couldn't work because they shut down construction, which is what he did. Then kind of fast forward to the summer, I'm pregnant with my second child, first son. And I know that I want to leave. Like, I know I've been kind of like, I kind of on the side was building a website, kind of figuring out what I could offer. I knew what I wanted to do, the finance for startup thing. I didn't know exactly what that was going to be. And in August 2020, the timing kind of worked out where my husband's job was back up and running and I was able to make the jump. And it was a more scary than before because we were both kind of self-employed, no buffer of income. But again, my gut said, this is the right move. And I felt like being pregnant, I was 3 months pregnant. Nobody on my team at Starbucks knew, which is the benefit of remote work at the time, I knew that I needed to build the business before I had my son, because if I had waited, it just would have been a lot harder. And so I left and I kind of did a similar kind of scrappy approach. I just networked and was like, I will take any work up front. So I worked a little bit. It was hard to sell when I was like, yeah, I can't do ongoing stuff because I'm about to have a baby. I got like a whole bunch of traction the week before my son was born. I probably met like 4 or 5 different clients right before he was born. And then I purposely took time off so that I could hang out with him and recover. And then I just kind of started working part-time about 4 months after he was born. And then it's just been growing ever since. And within about that, from when he was 4 months old to 8 months old, then I had gotten back to full-time work and I had the work to keep going. And I just kind of kept structuring my business so that it was clearer and clearer and had a path forward. And so here we are.
Well, that's awesome. No, it's a fun journey, and glad that even with the different paths that you took and the detours and that it was led you to be able to grow the business and to be able to pursue the for-profit dream that you always wanted. So with that now as we kind of catch up to the present day, it's always a great time to transition to the 2 questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So let's jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? And what did you learn from it?
Oh, that's a tough question. I feel like I made a lot. I think when I first did the freelancing, I didn't know what the end goal was going to be. I kind of needed to do this now, but had I really thought through what was like, am I going to create a business or am I just creating a job for myself? I think that was a bad decision in that sense, like not taking the risk necessarily. That was still a good decision, but the not having clarity on what was the end goal and setting some sort of like target, like I have to go make this revenue and I don't know how I'm going to go do it. I would have changed that.
No, I think that, it's one of those where as you get further in your journey, you have the ability to look back. You can find things that would change or mistakes you made, but at the time, and you make the best decisions with the information you have. So definitely makes sense and great mistake to learn from.
Yeah.
Second question I always ask is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah. So kind of actually similar to that worst decision, I give this advice a lot. Actually, it's one of the questions I ask when clients come and talk to me, but is what are your goals? And whether that's the first 90 days or the first 2 to 3 years, I think that drives a lot of how you're going to do it. So in my instance, um, I knew I wanted to start a business, but I didn't really set that as a goal. And then some people really just want the flexibility to own their job. And so I was owning my job, but I wasn't starting a business, and there was conflict there. And some people just, it's just different. So if you know that you want to run a giant 7-figure business and you have that at the forefront, you're going to create processes and systems to get there. And if
Mm.
you know that you just want the flexibility to be a solopreneur, then you can set up different systems and processes to do that as well.
No, and I think that that's a good point. So, I mean, I think most people will say probably go into their own business. You know, one is they're probably saying, "Hey, I hate working for other people, or I don't get along with other people,
Yeah.
or I want to do my own thing or make my own decisions." But I think two is also coming to the realization. Sometimes you're saying, you know, money is nice, and I still need to make money and make the payment. But sometimes people are saying, "I just want to be an empire builder. I want to make as much money and build as big a business and be successful." And other times you're getting into and you're saying, you know, I'd rather just have, you know, quote unquote, and it always, you know, sounds like people are making fun of it, but a lifestyle business. In other words, you're saying I want to not have to work a million hours a week, and I don't want to have to, you know, feel like I'm always strapped down in the office, and I want to be able to make the decisions. As long as I make a good income, maybe I only work 3 or 4 days a week and I have a bit more free time, or I get to, you know, make more direction. I think that having that, you know, goals and that understanding in mind, the sooner you can get to it, can set you up for being a lot happier with the businesses you run up.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, awesome. Well, now as we wrap towards the end of the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be a employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, Natalie Cook. There's probably a few. Copyright Strategies, Natalie Cook. You can find me that way. My website is copyrightstrategies.com. And my email is on there. And then my email is natalie@copyrightstrategies.com. So
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage everybody to reach out to you, contact you, and support a great business and help you along your journey as you help others along their journey. So, with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Couple more things as listeners to help us share these journeys. If you can click share, subscribe, leave us a review. We are always wanting to make sure we can share these journeys with as many people to help them along their journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Natalie, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
thank you so much.